Have you been thinking to yourself, what is this new Juneteenth federal holiday? Hello, I'm Prince Taylor, and before you head to the beach, just know that this is not a new holiday. In fact, Juneteenth has been around and celebrated since 1865. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then, and in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. Unfortunately, that did not free all enslaved people. In 1865, 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, Union soldiers, led by General Gordon Granger, arrived in the coastal city of Galveston, Texas. The general made the announcement officially ending slavery in the state and in the nation. Juneteenth, short for June 19th, is considered the longest-running African-American holiday. And on June 17, 2021, President Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, making it an official federal holiday. Simply put, Juneteenth is a celebration of African-American culture for all Americans. There are many local observances, including concerts, parades, prayer services, and so much more. Now that you know a little more about Juneteenth, how will you celebrate?
Buenos dias, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Before we start with the program, we have a very special guest, our Deputy Secretary, Ms. Tanya Bradsher.
Hi, good afternoon. Just wanted to take an opportunity to thank our amazing panelists for being with us today. We are so incredibly honored. And, while Juneteenth is a relatively new federal holiday, it has been celebrated for quite some time. And I do hope we all take an opportunity tomorrow to reflect while we're off. And I just can't think of a better way to celebrate for our VA employees as well as our veterans than having our honored guests here. So thank you so much for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedules, and we are so grateful for you to participate. So thank you and enjoy, everyone.
Thanks again. My name is James Albino. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Minority Veterans. Buenos dias. Thank you for joining us today, and a historic day it is. This is a first for the department, and we are excited that you have joined the Center for Minority Veterans and the Center for Women Veterans as we celebrate Juneteenth. On this historic day, it is not only right that we bring you individuals historic in their own right to tell their stories that tie to Juneteenth. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you these luminaries for today's conversation. Our moderators for today's Army veteran Stephanie Merlo. She's an accomplished leader driven by passion and determination. She served as a co-chair of Virginia's governor's LGBTQ+ advisory board. She is one of the inaugural members of, as well as the COO of the Pink Berets, a nonprofit organization that provides therapeutic service for women who suffer from invisible injuries. She has also served on the board of the Virginia Pride as the executive chair. Her multiple years of service to others has rightfully earned her the President's Lifetime Achievement Award, which is that little pin that's on her left lapel. Very impressive. Tony Woods was appointed by Governor Moore to serve as Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the state of Maryland to assist veterans, active duty members, and their families and dependents in securing benefits earned through their uniformed services. Secretary Woods is an Army veteran with 2 deployments to Iraq, where he earned a Bronze Star for his service. He continues to serve as a major in the U.S. Army Reserves, where he is assigned to the Joint Staff at the Pentagon as an intelligence analyst. In the private sector, he worked for Cisco Systems, Boston Consulting, and Capital One. In the public sector, he served as a leader and board member of mission-driven nonprofit philanthropic enterprises and served as White House Fellow under President Obama. Tony holds degrees from West Point, Harvard, and the University of Maryland, and resides in Prince George's County. One of my absolute favorite luminaries, leaders, and badasser sits on the Center for Minority Veterans Advisory Committee, Dr. Linda Singh. She is a retired Major General of the Maryland Army National Guard. She enlisted in the Guard in 1981 to fix radars. She served as an enlisted soldier for 11 years before she received her officer's commission in 1994. She has done it all, served in Kosovo, Afghanistan. She commanded the Maryland Army National Guard. She founded her consultancy business, Kaleidoscope Effect, LLC. She was named as the 29th Adjutant General for the Maryland National Guard by Governor Hogan, which means that she became the first woman and first African-American to hold that position in the state of Maryland. I am pleased and humbled to be in your collective shadows. Please welcome our distinguished guests. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, James. So, just to reiterate, this is an amazing holiday that is long overdue to become a federal holiday. And when it comes down to Juneteenth, I know that this is something new, right, that many people have never even heard about, and so it also comes with a lot of education. So hopefully everybody will leave here today learning a little bit more about some of the origins, a little bit more about us, and also will give you and inspire you to start kind of looking up and researching to maybe find some stories about your family who has come up from Juneteenth and what that would look like. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So my name is Stephanie Merlot. Like James had mentioned, my maiden name is Brown. Now, I would have hyphenated it. Brown Merlot sounds a little gross. It's an aged wine, and Merlot doesn't age too well for me. But I hail from Texas. Now, my family, the Browns, they all came from Galveston area, Houston, Brazoria County, and I'm going to tell you their story about Juneteenth. My great-great-grandfather, Charlie Brown, is said to have put on the very first Juneteenth celebration. He was the richest black man in Texas at the time. He died a millionaire. And that day, in 1865, when General Granger came down to Galveston and read that article to say that you were all free, I want you to imagine yourself there at that moment. You're walking these streets, right? And you are an enslaved person, so you're not walking freely. You have a specific colored wrap around your head that indicates that you are an enslaved person and not free. Then you see these people coming up and marching. You see this man on a horse, and based off of what one of my relatives had said when asked about this, so this is a descendant, or I'm a descendant of this woman. She said that she remembers that day because she saw the colored troops walking towards her. She goes, the colored men with the rifles gave me that moment that let me know that I was free. And not to even mention the fact that they had been free for 2 years prior to, right, during the Emancipation Proclamation. So then there's just this whole anger that comes out as well. So once that had happened, of course, there's going to be celebrations now. But what is it that you would like to do? You have been enslaved your whole life. Your family has been taken away from you. Your siblings, your mom, your dad, husband, wife, cousins. You want to find your family. And then you want to celebrate. And here we are, Juneteenth. The celebration of freedom and family. And that's something that my great-great-great-grandfather, Charlie Brown, tried to do. And one of the things he would always preach to the family is that we are blood, we are family, we have to keep celebrating this day because until we're not all free, until we're all free. he would bring down a brass band from Houston. He would bring in people who cannot afford to travel by buggy, by train, horseback, however he could, and he would all bring them down to celebrate. They had all of these events, a grease pole contest where they would try to climb up a greased pole, which sounds absolutely terrifying in the middle of Texas heat and impossible. But it was something that they did. Not a lot of entertainment down there in the country, so you have to make do with your resources. But one of the stories that I found very interesting was a story of where they learned of their freedom. As we know that this news traveled by horseback, word of mouth, all of that. And out there in Brazoria County, near the sugarcane fields, which is now known as Old Ocean, I believe, there was a tree. It was a bois-d'arc tree. And the way that it branched over and hovered over everybody perfectly so that you were hidden from that harsh sun. And all of these enslaved individuals were listening to this person read them this article to say, you are free. You are free. You don't have to stay here. You can go. That tree has since died, and what happened is that they had uprooted it, and one of my cousins, probably third cousin, he took it and he carved a story. Using the roots, he carved faces of those who were enslaved, who are now going free into the heavens. On the other side, there's a family embracing each other. And on one side, there were a line of enslaved individuals coming from ships. So it's this whole circular motion. But the fact that these people and their souls were escaping to the heavens said so much about that piece of artwork. And I wish I had an image to show you all, but I'm trying to paint it. So you can imagine what it was like sitting underneath that bois-d'arc tree and hearing, you are free. So with that, I'm going to pass this mic, and I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions. So, Ms. Retired General, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, geez, that's loud. Is that working? Sorry. Hello? Okay, so I grew up in Maryland, so I'm born and bred in the country. So I didn't grow up in the city, and I think that, that amazes people that I've stayed so long in the state of Maryland. But I grew up in Frederick County, and if you know anything about Frederick County, way back in the days when I was growing up, it was very rural. It still is pretty rural. And we stayed on family land. So when I think about family and just what it means for this particular day and thinking about my roots, my last name is currently today Singh, which is a little misnomer because that's my married name. I grew up a Willis. And when I think about our roots and where we came from, it really didn't hit me, and we didn't really talk about slavery and all of those times, right? Like it just wasn't something that my grandparents talked about or even my parents. And so a lot of times it would leave us just, looking at, I'd look at my uncles and my aunts, I'd look at my grandmother and just look at her eyes. She had hazel eyes, and sometimes they would be blue. And I'm just like, okay, that's weird. Like, where does that, when you get old enough, you start thinking about those things. And then my great-grandmother who, my grandparents raised me. And my grandparents had 14 kids living. So they raised 14 kids, 2 girls out of that whole bunch. And then they had me for 9 years. And so I grew up, getting to know my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was white, which I never really understood the dynamics of that and the fact that we were living on her land that her brother bought for her and paid for her to be free.
Wow.
And so her last name was Hammond, and that's a huge family name in Maryland, so you'll find Hammonds all over the place. But what I thought was, just so interesting when I got old enough to really start thinking about what it meant and where I came from and, what can I be proud of, right? So my grandfather served in World War II in the Navy. I can't even imagine during that time serving in the Navy when, we were still fighting for really our rights. And so that's not what inspired me to join the military, because I don't think I understood it to that level. And then I had several uncles who served in Vietnam. But when I just think about family in general, we had a 4-room house at that time, no running water, no indoor plumbing, and it was the best living ever. Like, we were poor, and I didn't even know we were poor. My clothes, most of the time, were hand-me-downs from the families that my grandmother took care of. And I will never forget the earners and the weavers. So these families would send me big bags of clothes that were from their kids, because a lot of times their kids were older than I was. And I thought it was like Christmas every single day. Like, I couldn't wait to see what was in the bags of clothes that I was getting, right? So that was just how it was during those times. And if I, kind of fast forward, I had to move with my parents when I was 9, not because my grandparents wanted to get rid of me, because my parents felt like they wanted to give me a better life. And I had never lived with my parents, so it was a huge culture shock. Yeah. My mom and her family is from Washington, D.C., so when we would come down to D.C., I'd always end up in a fight, because I didn't like, and it wasn't with the girls, by the way. It was always with the boys. I always got into a fight with the boys. And so that was kind of, when I think about just this whole circle of life and how family turns out, and I would have never thought that I'd end up being the individual that would have to leave home and find myself homeless at the age of 16 and searching for, what do I do? Like, people that were slaves lived on the streets. They went from place to place, right? Sometimes they were hiding, and they were in really worse situations. And here I am finding myself at my age and at 16 on the streets and trying to figure out, how do I make ends meet? And I didn't know anything else but to work, right? That was my first mentality, is to quit school and work, because that's what I grew up with. We were a working family. No one in our family just stayed home. Everybody worked. And so when I got the amazing opportunity to talk to a recruiter, and a recruiter that really, and he was just like, hey, you should think about joining the Guard. And when I started having the conversation that, look, I dropped out of high school, he said, you're in luck. He said, if you score well enough on the ASVAB, we can get you in on a waiver being a female. So I was able to get into the National Guard on a waiver being a female, went to basic training at age 17, wow. Had no idea that I was going to spend this whole long career. I just knew that I had found something that I was good at, right? And I hate to say that, like, I cried when I left basic training, so that's like really scary, because I was like, one, I was just like, I don't have a home, so where am I going to go after this? But two, I had really found something that I enjoyed. And so I started really thinking about my roots and where I'm from, and like, why are we so, some of my family is so fair-skinned and some are darker skinned. Like, where does that all come from? And obviously, Ancestry, thanks for Ancestry.com. I am 50% European and 40% African.
I think we might be cousins.
Yes. And so when you think about that, though, it just, and all this time I grew up thinking I was Indian. Was not. There's not even a quiver in there, right? So it's all something else. And I say that because, family, it helped me to understand the differences in the eyes and, the coloring of the skin and just, some of the hair even down. So it helped me to really understand traditionally, where my family's from and why is it so diverse. And oh, by the way, we've got amazing genes, and so I absolutely love it. But, for me to stay so long in the military and just be the beacon for all of these individuals that could have only been from my grandmother giving me that strong hand. So that woman figure, right, who was taking care of other people's kids, raising her own kids, not really having a lot of money, to give me the strength to say, you work and you work hard and you will be successful. And so when I think about, just celebrating Juneteenth, it's more than just the day that, you were free. It is about how do we continue to work to stay free. Yes. And that probably strikes me more than anything else. And so part of my job is to continue to push so that the younger people understand that life, and it's a privilege, right? What we have here in the U.S. is a privilege. And so how do we continue to cultivate that in ways that's going to make us, really feel proud of our heritage? And oh, by the way, if we all got a DNA test, I think we're all related, by the way. So that's it. I'll pass it over.
Yes, thank you so much. And, to reiterate, I too have a similar background, living in and out of poverty. And I'm biracial. My mom is white, my dad is black. But, I lived on hand-me-downs as well. And I think with that, we grow up with a certain type of respect for things like, the fact that you got into the military on a waiver, as a woman. And things that aren't always easily accessible, for some people. As we go on and as society moves on, those things are becoming accessible. And that's something to always celebrate. So thank you for that. Secretary Woods?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's fascinating to hear both of your stories, and I'm almost envious of the amount of knowledge and research that you have done into your roots, and it's inspiring me to kind of continue. I think I'm fairly common in my experience for African American families who there's sort of a point at which the records are no longer good, or you have no kind of clear sense of what was going on prior to that. And so I think I share that experience with many others. As I understand it now, so I grew up with just my mom. And sort of from her side, her mother is both English and from Trinidad. And so a biracial family kind of came together pretty early on, which was still kind of on the vanguard even for the UK at that time. And then on my grandfather's side, I know it only goes back as far as Tennessee, and there was an enslaved person in our lineage, and that's about as far back as I can go without much certainty. I agree with you, though. 23andMe actually has been a real eye-opening part of this. On my father's side, he is from New York, but his family is from Panama. And so I always knew there's got to be something there similar. 40% European and 60% African, mostly West African. And so I think that component is also quite similar and quite eye-opening, right? We don't realize how much of our experience is multicultural, multinational in that way. And so it does make for a dynamic story. I will say, raised by a single mom who worked as a housekeeper. But my mom and dad met when they were both serving in the Air Force, right? So my mom kind of was inspired by my grandfather, who retired from the Air Force. She joined in 1977 or 78 or so, met my father in Germany, got pregnant with me, and then for some reason that I have not yet figured out, she's no longer with us, but decided that she was going to raise me on her own. And so she came back to Travis Air Force Base when my grandfather retired and had me. And then from that point forward, even though she was an Air Force veteran, she worked as a housekeeper for basically my entire upbringing. And for me, what that resulted in is this knowledge that I had an appreciation for service, and having grown up around an Air Force base and gone to that Air Force Base school district because we lived close enough. But I knew that I was going to need help in order to get a good education and to change the trajectory of my life. And so for me, I started getting letters in the mail around junior year of high school saying, hey, here, come consider this school. Then I got a letter from West Point. And, my mom kind of pointed this out. And she's like, hey, but this is a really good school. And I was like, all right, we'll put it in the really good school pile then. And they sent an officer to Sacramento, California, about 45-minute drive away. We went to that presentation, and from that moment forward, I knew service was the only way. On that drive back, 45 minutes, I knew this is the only school that this is where I'm going to go. And like an idiot, it was the only school that I applied to, but thank God it worked out. And that really set me off on my journey of military service. And so I was kicked out of the military under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in 2009, but worked on advocating for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I think I raise that example because when we think about abolition or women's suffrage or the civil rights movement, it is so rare that the individuals, the generations of individuals who go into advocating and ultimately leading to those outcomes, it's so rare that you get to actually enjoy the fruit of that labor. And so I feel for me, there's generations of individuals who fought for equality, LGBT equality in the military, and for me to then get an opportunity to serve, right? So in 2014, a couple of years after repeal, I was able to rejoin the Army Reserve and continue to serve to this day. But for me, the last point that I'll make is that it's also, for me, Juneteenth is kind of a variety of mixed emotions, right? I think a lot of us realize that we don't teach complete history here in our country. And so I was very embarrassed when I learned about Juneteenth, probably 2 years before it became a federal holiday. I learned about it because I had a friend who grew up in Texas, where it was a much more significant day. But I was sort of sheepish of not really understanding what it meant. But I think one of the things that's beautiful about it, one, it is an opportunity for us to teach a broader, more holistic history, but two, I think we have the opportunity as the United States to shape what this holiday means to us. And I think we all have an obligation to ensure that it's not just about, okay, great, we gave you that holiday, now we're done, systemic racism is solved. We're far from it, right? How do we use this as an opportunity to rededicate ourselves to more inclusive policies, to actually continuing to make the progress that is necessary for us to be, the more kind of perfect union that we hope that we can be as a United States.
Thank you for that, and I agree 100%. I know I mentioned before how it is important that we educate others on the importance of this holiday and how it came to be and those who are involved in it. And it goes way beyond just Juneteenth. Just like you said, I served also, I was in the Army and I served also during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which I was sexually assaulted by a woman, and I could not report it because if I reported it, then that would incriminate me. And, I was just telling Ms. Singh here that did not come out with that until 2020, and that incident happened in 2004. So, and I carried that for so long, and I'm still carrying that. I still have my moments. My wife actually just took me on a vacation to the beach because I was having moments, and I had to get away, and I had to refocus myself and my energies and my purpose. And one thing that all of us have in common is how blended that we are with many different cultures. And, I love how we all kind of went onto these ancestry sites, whether it's 23andMe or are we going to get like a sponsorship from Ancestry is what I'm looking for here. But one thing that I had found out, of course, I see my mom's side. I expected her to be European. She's got the nose and everything. She passed away, but big old green eyes, and I have many of her facial features. And I look at my dad. My dad had some Irish in him, which was weird. And I was like, well, is it weird? Because I look back at Charlie Brown and his wife Isabel and found this out. So Charlie Brown was said to be a freed slave from Virginia. Somehow he managed to find his way into Texas. I don't know when, I don't know how, and no one knows where he got his money from, but he had money. And then he also looked biracial. He is a spitting image of my brother. And his wife, Isabel, she was also enslaved, also biracial. And what I just found out yesterday was that she was related to, down there in Texas, they know who they are, but the Dance family. Dance family had created weapons for the Confederates. And what Charlie Brown did is, from what I understand, he bought her freedom. And they were married. And then afterwards, he bought their mansion. And then he uprooted it, and then he moved it to the other side of West Columbia as kind of, and that to me was just like, look what I did, and you can't stop me. And I'm here to make a difference, you know, and with that, he created some of the first black schools in that area, churches, donated land to help individuals. He even let people stay on their land a lot of the times, you know, and because they could not afford to do anything differently. And he gave them a job. Anybody, white, black, he did not care. You need a job, I will give you a job. What we're not gonna do is let anybody fall behind in this economy, you know, because after the Civil War, history shows that it was rough, especially in the South. But I can go on and on about that. I'm a big history nerd. But I love how we have that connection and how even though that we are also blended, you know, it's like you had said, like we all might be related, you know. I grew up with Juneteenth. I was in parades, you know, I remember marching down in Austin, you know, during Juneteenth and wearing an oversized shirt. And every family reunion, we had that tree on our shirt and, you know, the generations of it. And from what I know is that the Brown family reunion is one of the longest running family reunions in Texas. And we always gather on Juneteenth. And I didn't figure that out until later in life. And I was connecting the dots and I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. But I wish that there was a way, oh, that got loud. There was a way to really educate people on Juneteenth, the importance of it, how did we get there, even when it comes, it's June, you know what I mean? So even during Pride Month, what does that look like as well? And how do you think we could do that?
Well, I mean, I think we all have to start with thinking about where we came from, right? Because you can only do that through doing the research, trying to gain an understanding and an appreciation for all of your roots, really. And because if you don't think about where it started, then you can't really envision, you know, what the power of the future can be. And so, you know, for my kids, so I'm in even a more blended family, so it is just crazy. And you talk about Trinidad, so my husband's from Trinidad and Tobago. And if you see, you know, I'm in my second marriage, and so if you see my oldest daughter, and she actually just posted what I thought was just amazing, you know, to her dad, which is, you know, my current husband. And she basically said that even though you're not my dad, you took me in as if you were. So just think about Singh being Indian, and my husband and I have been married over 32 years. This year we'll make 33. And so crossing into another boundary, he's Hindu, I'm Baptist. Actually, I was raised Methodist, turned Baptist, then went AME, so I'm confused. I don't know. I just really like, you know, all the different religions. But when you just think about that mix, and so, you know, we have such a blended family, and what we try to really get them to understand is, you know, look further than just what you see. Let's start now looking at the foundation, and let's appreciate, you know, where we all came from. And let's appreciate what makes us all special. And the one thing that, you know, I would say if we start with that, but then more importantly, making sure that everyone knows is that every single one of us has something in common. Our heart beats. I don't care who you are, your heart beats. Your heart beats. And that's something that we can wrap ourselves around every single time to understand that commonality, because it all starts there. That single beat of the heart creates us. And so if we can kind of wrap ourselves around that, then I think we can talk about it from a non-heated perspective and just appreciate the value and where you are and who you are, and just be inquisitive. But just realize that we all have a heartbeat.
I love that point, and I think I want to pick up on kind of another aspect that you raised, the fact that it is Pride Month. And my hope for kind of the future of both of the sort of intersection of these two moments is that we don't force them to become in opposition to one another and sort of pit these holidays or these observances against one another, because there really is no need. And I think my hope is that we view the common struggle and the common need to make progress for groups of people. We realize there's beauty in that intersection, and there's value in that intersection, and we treat it as such. We actually spend a lot of time in Easton, Maryland, and a couple of years ago they were doing they had a Juneteenth celebration and a Pride celebration. They shut down the streets, and both communities kind of created booths, and I was walking to what I thought was the Pride event, and I'm realizing, okay, well, there's more going on. Let me understand what is being celebrated here. And I sort of thought to myself, well, I hope both parties knew what was going on. And I realized just how harmonious, and it was a positive, beautiful celebration of a community and multiple communities at the same time. And I think, to me, that is my hope, is that we sort of view that as we have a common struggle, we can work together, and to think about the intersectional experiences of people who belong in both communities, and realize that we're a lot more powerful if we work together towards that common, more just society that we all hope for.
I agree 100%. It is very important for everybody in the community, especially whenever we have marginalized communities such as these, to try to work together as opposed to against each other. You know, I can learn about the Stonewall riots and how Pride started with a riot, and the stories from that. And I could also learn about how the struggle was for Black individuals as we come up, even as a gay Black individual, you know. Then you got like 2 strikes against you. And then if you're transgender, oh my God, you know, it's even more taboo. And in June, there is so much to be celebrated, though. We all have a heartbeat. We all have something to be proud of. If it's our heritage, if it's work that we have done in the past, or work that we are currently doing. And, you know, that should be shared. That should be shared in the community, and that creates a sense of community as well, because you're bringing in others who don't know about this, who can become an ally, and who will want to share that, who will want to go out there and spread the word. Did you hear about Juneteenth? I don't know what that is. Let me tell you. And I remember when they made Juneteenth a federal holiday, I was working, and I had a CEO, and he was probably like 28, and he was like, well, what's Juneteenth? And I was like, well, what do you think it is? And he told me, he goes, well, isn't it whenever the Civil War ended? And I just looked at him, I was like, okay, I'm gonna give you that. You know, no, but you're getting there. You're getting there, you know. And having to educate him on the importance of that and why we should have that. I'm gonna take off, you guys can work. I'm not gonna be here, is really what I told him. I was like, no, sir, I'm not gonna be here. You can count me tardy, late, or whatever, or write me up, but I'm not gonna do it. And because I felt like it's something that should be celebrated. And growing up in Texas, it was something that we all did. So when I came here in high school, and Juneteenth came around, I was like, all right, where are the parades? All right, you know, get some candy, you know, and they throw out in the street. It's all broken up, but we still ate it. And, you know, thinking about the being in the parade, and then all of the fests that are gonna happen, and the barbecue. And none of that happened. No one knew about it. No one. My teachers, they didn't know anything about it. And it blew my mind. So I'm really glad that everybody's learning about it now. You know, it's never too late. Never too late to educate, right? So hopefully, like I said, I know our overall goal is, of course, to uplift you and help educate you, but also encourage you to go out into the communities and to share the stories, maybe share our stories as well, and to see exactly, what more that you can learn, maybe even inspire you to do some digging on your family history, because, I mean, you will be so surprised of what you find out and where you came from. I know on Ancestry, I don't know if they do this for 23andMe, but they have the communities, like whenever from settlers who had came here, and I don't know if you had this question like I did. It was like early settlement in Connecticut, and I was like, oh, I don't know what side that's from, because it really could be any side. I don't know if that's on my white side or my black side. Who came over here, And the earliest ancestry said that most of my family came from Nigeria, and it said that they had migrated over to the United States. I was like, migrated? That's an option. You choose to migrate, right? That's something you're willing to do. That's not what happened. Don't try to wash this and make it seem more innocent than it actually was. No, these people were taken against their will. We need to change that up. That is not okay, Ancestry. So,
But I think that is, I mean, I know for me, it does talk about the migration and how that happened, but if you read a little bit deeper, it also talks about how, individuals went from Africa to like Europe. And then when I think, so for me, how and why I started down that path of doing the Ancestry, I'm going to be totally honest with you, is here I was serving as the Adjutant General, and we had the civil disturbance going on in Baltimore, and people were saying, look at her, she's not black. Her name is Singh. And I was like, oh, here we go. Okay, did you ever hear about a married name? Because yes, it confuses a lot of people, and the fact that I'm light-skinned, and in reality, if my hair's pulled back and it's really wavy, then yeah, you might think that I'm from maybe South India, right? I mean, I've had folks from India and say, yeah, you could very well be from one of the Indian countries, right? I mean, so I think that really started making me think about, okay, I want to make sure that if people are starting to then question who I am, I want them to know very clearly who I am. Yeah. And I felt like it was going to tell me, because my mom would always say, oh, we're Indian. Right? And I just thought we had high cheekbones, and yeah, that was correct. Let me tell you, when I got the results, I had to sit with it for like 3 days. I put it down, I read it, I picked it back up, and I was like, this is impossible. There is no American Indian in me at all. Zero.
that is the exact same thing that happened to me.
And I'm just sitting here, and I'm just like, and I talk to my daughters, and I go, oh, we really got to change some shirts. Like, there's no Indian. I mean, we got Irish, we got Scottish. I mean, it was just so, and I will tell you, it struck me, like, I was just like, how can this be so wrong? Like, my mom and dad, like, they had no clue. I'm just like, okay, you all need to get a clue. So, I tried to kind of talk to my mom about it, and she was like, I wanted her to do a test as well, and she refused to do it. The great thing is, with Ancestry, I can go out and look at siblings and other children. I'm running into cousins, and I'm just like, okay, so that family, Dorsey's, we're related to them? Well, my uncle married a Dorsey. So did we marry a cousin? Right? I mean, that could be very well, right? Because there's the families. And so it just struck me as, it was a culture shock for me. Let's just put it that way. It was an identity shock, because all this time growing up, I just assumed that I was Indian and part white, right? Which kind of gave me that, the mixture and where I came from, and it was not true whatsoever. And so now, my daughters, they were just like, so their grandfather, was not Irish, and I go, well, he was adopted by an Irish family. So does that make him Irish because his name was William Ireland? We still don't know the answer to that, but we do have some Irish in our family, and so I think it's just unique to kind of really dig in and try to understand. And I will tell you, I meet people from all over, and I go, well, we're probably related. And I will, if I go to Europe and I go, oh yeah, that's my European side coming out, or, and so I think we need to kind of celebrate, just the dynamics of that. And if we could just start with just asking, instead of saying, well, where are you from? Because that can be a little bit of a loaded question. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background? What's your family's background? And I think we could find a lot just by asking that and uncovering that aspect of it.
Yep, 100%. I laugh because I don't know, at least where I'm from, down in Texas, many black individuals will always say, oh, we got Indian in our family. You know what I mean? I see you laughing because you know. And, when I got my ancestry results back, I too was like, oh, I know it's in there, and it wasn't. And so I was like, Dad, you need to take this ancestry test. I think I've been lied to my whole life. And, at the time I was like 35. I was like, this is unacceptable. And he too took the test. There's absolutely none in him as well. So it was funny at the same time when, your whole life you've been told this, and then, you try to also represent a culture, and then you're not that culture, which is always like, oh, like your dog, we need to get rid of some of these shirts. Like, this is something that we really can relate to. That was kind of a funny story. But yeah, you have anything to add to that as well?
I'll simply say, since it sounds like we're a 23andMe and Ancestry commercial, for me, my experience actually ended up being, so my mom always had encouraged me to find your father.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have much of an interest in doing that. And her last gift to me before she passed away was this 23andMe kit on Christmas, I believe. And fast forward about a year or so after she had passed away, it was the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. And most folks know if you do this little ancestry test, you see your readout and you're like, all right, cool, that's my breakdown, and you have kind of this reaction to it. But there's little reason to go back to the platform, right? They have very little reason. So they ask you, do you want to opt in to hear about your DNA relatives? So I said yes. And every once in a while you get a notification, and it's like, okay, you figure out what your password was and all that sort of login stuff. And then you get back in and you're like, okay, great, I have a 7th cousin in Timbuktu. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, one day, this Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I get this notification that says you have a new DNA relative. Figure out my password, log in. You have a new DNA half-brother. I was like, oh, well, this is different. He messages me. He knows the story, right? I think our dad and your mom met in the Air Force, et cetera. I was like, okay, this is getting crazy. We have 5 siblings.
Oh.
Oh, okay. And they live in the D.C., Baltimore area. And I'm like, okay, this is getting really, really specific. And so sure enough, I got a Facebook message from a woman who I didn't know, and she's messaging me. We're messaging back and forth. And she's like, well, I live in the D.C. area. I live in D.C. area. I live in Maryland. I live in Maryland. I live in Bowie. I live in Bowie. And at this point, I thought she was going to ask me for my credit card information. I'm like, wait a minute. And so sure enough, it turns out I have 5 siblings, found them because of this platform, and my father found that he lives in Maryland as well.
Oh, wow.
And so it really has been, when you think about if our history, our experience as African Americans has been, particularly those who were enslaved, for families to be broken up and split apart and sold off. The blessing that is this modern technology, you can take qualms with it, but the blessing that is this modern technology of understanding our stories and our roots and reconnecting with family, it really is a blessing in that way. So for those who want to consider, who are curious, it can have that benefit for your family as well.
Yes, I think that is such an amazing story, and how shocking that could be all at the same time. And the stories that you could have shared, just of like how maybe they, like, when did you find that out, like 5 years ago, this year? Or?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it was identity shattering, because I was an only child raised by a single mom. And now my dad lives 30 miles away and I have 5 siblings, and you're an uncle, because, what I mean? So all these things changed overnight.
It's a lot of Christmas presents.
Exactly, which really does change kind of your sense of self in a variety of ways, past and present.
Yeah. absolutely. That would definitely be a shocker for me as well. And trust me, I wait for those updates all the time just to make sure.
I take those notifications a lot more seriously now.
Yeah,
Yes.
right, absolutely. I'm just like, well, what else did we find out? And, but it's, when I'm looking through a lot of these archives and finding some of the information that I did about my great-great-grandfather, his name was Charles Brown, but everybody called him Charlie Brown. So if you want to Google him, you just put in Juneteenth, Charlie Brown, and you'll find a plethora of things from Houston and Brazoria County. But it told me so many different stories, and that's where I learned about how his wife was a formerly enslaved woman, how he was one of the richest black men, and how he worked really hard to try to uplift his community and celebrate Juneteenth, and how important that specific day was to him to rally up our family, and still like century and some change since then, and how we still managed to every Juneteenth rally up the troops and celebrate. And to me, that is something that's really, really powerful. And given I don't live in Texas anymore, I'm in touch with some of my cousins, and my dad has since moved here with me because he was diagnosed with stage 4 recently. And so it's Juneteenth now will just be celebrated with just, my wife and him, but it still means something because my dad has shared so many stories about how we came to be where we are today, and it is mind-boggling how there's a school that's named, well, it's no longer operating, but how it was named after him, and because it was important that black individuals and black children had that education. He was an entrepreneur during his time, and he worked to try to uplift this community and kids. So of course he wanted to see that and put it back in to the economy and teach children how they too can become an entrepreneur, work for themselves, whether it's cutting down cedar trees and moving them up the river, which is what he did, or whether it's building furniture from those cedar trees, whether it's, becoming a farmer, because there's not a lot of black farmers. But in that area, there's a lot of farming land. So Juneteenth is not just a celebration, in my opinion. It's not just a celebration of freedom, but it's a celebration of yourself and your successes, of where your ancestors were and where you are today. That is a celebration in its own. You are no longer that person that they wish that they never were, and they just wanted to climb out and they just wanted to get to that freedom. And I even think of the woman who was George Washington's slave and how she managed to escape and lived a life of poverty, and she didn't care because it was better than being enslaved. And I think that when it comes to growing up without some things, you're still happy. You're still existing, you're still there, you're still managing to do stuff within the community. And I think that's really, important.
And when you think about community, so one of the things that I got, and it was a surprise to me, so someone who had went to school with me, they wanted me to be a keynote speaker at an event, a Veterans Day event. And I did not know that they were going to surprise me with one. She brought school photos with me in it so that she could prove to everybody that we were friends in school. And I was like, oh my God, please don't show that. But there was a family there, and they had farmland near us, the Ensers, and my grandfather worked on their farm. My grandmother took care of all of them. And I get chills when I think about it, because what they wanted to tell me is that my grandmother and grandfather, Herb and Jenny is what they called them, were like their parents. They said we would not be who we are today if they did not pour the love into us, and we wanted to be here to meet you because you're an offspring of them. And I will tell you, that was probably one of the best gifts that I could have been given because I didn't even know that, right? Like I knew the Inzers, I knew their farm, I went to school with some of their, grandkids, but I did not know that my grandparents did that. And it was, for me, it was one of these things that gave me a very different appreciation for what my grandparents did. And, when I would run into people that, my grandmother had worked for them and all of the kids that she took care of that didn't look like me. Yeah. And so that gave me immense pride because that helps me to see how much, no matter what we may be going through, but how much they poured into others, even during those times. And so when I just think about that, it just gave me the inspiration to pour into others, no matter who they are, where they're from. It's just to continue to pour into them.
Something that you're speaking to reminds me of something that I appreciate so much about the African American community is the willingness and the almost sense of obligation to raise and care for others, and the children of others in particular. I think we know this comes from our experience of if our families are fragile and can be separated at any moment, there is a need to take ownership and responsibility for someone. But you can fast forward from that sort of reality for enslaved people then to mass incarceration today. And there is still very much a need for the collective community to raise children and to raise people into good, healthy adults. And so I think your experience is it's a beautiful one, and I really appreciate that. If I could shift just slightly, though, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately with this holiday falling on a Wednesday, and you're sort of hearing about kind of the pushback of like, well, wouldn't it be better if it was on a 3-day weekend, or wouldn't it be better if it was a Friday or a Monday sort of thing? There's almost a part of me that wants us to kind of resist that urge to turn this into just yet another 3-day weekend, as much as 3-day weekends are nice. Use it as an excuse to turn it into take some time off, turn it into a 5-day weekend, whatever. But I think a lot of us, especially veterans, understand the frustration that is with Memorial Day in particular, and how that has become something that doesn't feel like it's about respecting the sacrifice of those who've served and lost their lives in defense of the country. I think we should learn that lesson when it comes to Juneteenth, and let this holiday land where it lands on the calendar, and use it as an opportunity to dedicate ourselves to exploring our own past, but also seeing what we can do today to keep up the fight for equality in our country.
And I think we're out of time. And the one thing, and I'm going to put a shout out just to my governor, because he basically said, we will survive through service. And so when I just think about this, is that if we can all just do a level of service, and that doesn't have to mean in uniform necessarily. All of you working here at Veterans Affairs, thank you for your service supporting us, because we could not do it without you, and we can't survive without you. So thank you. James.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to share one personal experience. My dad and his brother, they're Irish twins. They're about 10 months apart. Both enlisted in the Army at the same time in the same recruiting station. My dad is a little lighter than I am, and my uncle is maybe like Tony, about your color. They served one in the Philippines, the other one in Panama. When they got discharged in the same location, I think in Georgia. One got a DD-214 that said that he was black, and the other one that said that he was white. We're all Puerto Rican. So it was an odd experience. But I want to thank you, because I identified so much with everything that you were saying today, particularly how we as a culturally embrace raising children, raising people, and they're all family. I had a Titi Carmen that it wasn't until I got back from college that I realized she was not my aunt. And she'd lived in our house for 12 years, 15 years or something. So anyway, I want to thank the team from the Center for Women Veterans who helped us put this together, and my staff who are all back there with the Center for Minority Veterans who helped us put this together, and the amazing audiovisual folks that captured all this and is preserving it for us for posterity. I want to thank our guest speakers. Again, I'm proud to be in your shadows, so thank you very much. Thank you.